The shot cracked like dry timber splitting, and the town let out a breath it didn't know it was holding. Hats flew. A woman sobbed once. Relief, not grief. Someone whooped. On the scaffold at the edge of the square, the gallows rope swung lazily in the noon breeze, creaking as if it, too, approved. Sheriff Kane stood with smoke ghosting from the muzzle of his Colt .45. His silver badge caught a blade of sun and threw it like a knife across the dust. Rafe Mallory, the bounty hunter with a collection of human mistakes knotted to his saddle, lay on his back, eyes glassed over, blood blooming like spilled ink through the lapel of his black duster. The crowd's cheer rolled over Kane like heat from a foundry door. He did not lift his hat to it. He did not smile. Instead, he listened to what no one else heard in the thunder, the lie in their gratitude. They weren't cheering justice. They were cheering the end of their fear. Kane blew a thin breath across the gun barrel and holstered. The cartridge he'd spent spun once in the dirt by his boot and came to rest against his heel. He didn't move his foot. "About time, Sheriff," a rancher yelled, voice ragged with too many swallowed nights. "That devil work to folks like cattle. Wish you'd done it yesterday." Another spat. The air smelled of sun-baked pine pitch, sweat, and the copper of fresh blood. A sign above the mercantile squealed as the wind shifted. Somewhere behind Kane, a child laughed, quick, startled, then ashamed. Across the street, the jailhouse door hung ajar, its iron key on a hook inside, polite and useless. Kane's badge turned between his fingers. The metal was warm. He felt the tiny nick near the A in Kane, where a bullet had kissed it 2 years ago and not gotten farther. He looked down at Mallory. The dead man's right hand had stiffened around nothing, the shape of a pistol set into his palm like a habit that outlived him. The cheering stuttered, then wilted in the heat. A murmuring tide took its place. Boots scuffed, throats cleared. A minute earlier, no, less, the square had been a quiet lung full of dust and breath. Mallory had ridden in at a walk at high noon, the hour men with something to prove liked best. He'd tied his roan near the horse trough like any man buying flour, then dragged a boy in irons, the red-headed Harlan kid, out of the saddle behind him and shoved him forward until the boy stumbled to his knees in front of the courthouse steps. Dead or alive pays the same. Mallory had announced to no one in particular, his voice smooth as a river stone, "But dead don't talk, saves me paperwork." He'd turned then, slow enough to let folks fill in their own terror, and caught Kane with those pale, empty eyes. "Sheriff," he had drawled, tipping a hat he never paid for. "You got a problem with a man performing his lawful trade?" Kane had seen the bruises high on the boy's cheekbones, the old rope burns at his wrists, the way his shirt stuck where blood had dried under the ribs. He'd watched Mallory flick a crumb of tobacco from his lapel, like a man who never planned to meet God and explain anything. "The warrant on that boy's a forgery," Kane had said, voice even, signed by a dead judge from a county that ain't existed in 5 years. Mallory's grin had shown a silver tooth. "All paper is what men say it is. Ask Washington." He tipped his chin toward the gallows, rope swaying in the noon wind, "Or make it a trial, if it pleases your conscience." The crowd had backed farther from the two of them, opening a ring of dust. A dog, old and cowardly, had slunk under a wagon. The telegraph down the street ticked like a nervous heart. On the balcony of the hotel, 2 women watching shaded their eyes with fans, as if this might be theater that wouldn't stain them. Kane had rolled a bit of tobacco between finger and thumb, let it fall. Law ain't always justice. he'd said quietly, the words older than this street, older than this man in front of him, but justice rides with me. Men who'd known Kane long felt the sky lean when he said it. Mallory had laughed, and a bird had gone up from the courthouse eaves in a sudden clatter. "You got a poet's mouth for a lawman," he'd said. His left hand had twitched, small, almost polite, toward the butt of the star revolver riding his hip. Kane noticed the twitch. He'd been noticing things since he was 12. A horse that would lose a shoe by sundown, a drunk who wanted to fight but not die. The shadow at a window that didn't belong to the family inside. He saw, too, what no one else in that square wanted to. The little circle of worn leather on Mallory's belt, where a short length of chain hung. The chain had a girl's ribbon tied at the end of it. Pink once, dirty now. "Rafe Mallory," Kane had said. "Drop the iron." "Come take it," Mallory had replied. The rest took less than a breath. Mallory's fingers had flared, fast as any snake, and Kane's Colt had spoken first. A single round took Mallory high, just left of the sternum. He'd made a small sound, not pain, surprise. His knees had met dust, and then the back of his head. Silence. Then the town had broken like a fever. Now, in the wash of the cheering and its shame, Kane stepped forward and crouched. He reached to close Mallory's eyes and stopped. The bounty hunter's badge, a tin star stamped private contractor, had pinned his coat just above that dirty ribbon. Kane plucked the ribbon free and folded it once, twice. It felt like a lie in his palm, all that softness knotted to iron. The red-headed boy's irons clinked as someone helped him to his feet. "Much obliged, Sheriff," the boy whispered, voice raw, eyes fixed somewhere behind Kane's shoulder, as if the sky had just become more interesting than men. Kane nodded. The deputy, Elias Boone, young yet, mustache too hopeful for his face, jogged up with a ring of keys trembling in his hand and set to work on the cuff locks. Kane straightened. The square had thinned as quickly as it had filled. Cheering was a thing people did in a herd. Shame was a thing they wore alone. A gust sent pale dust lifting. It pebbled on Kane's tongue and tasted of pennies. "You all right, Sheriff?" Elias asked, not looking at the body. "I'm breathing," Kane said. Elias swallowed. "Telegraph's been chattering since late morning. Wires out of Fort Dyer. Word is, Mallory had friends with badges, government kind." The deputy's voice faltered, then steadied. We going to put him in the jail, or lay him out in the courthouse?" Kane looked from the courthouse, its door scarred, its brass scale of justice on the lintel tarnished, to the jail, where sun had blistered the paint around the barred window. The gallows creaked again, lazy and indifferent. "Neither," Kane said. "Wash him, lay him out proper. He was a man before he was a reckoning." Elias blinked as if he'd expected a different kind of answer. "Yes, sir." Kane stared at the red thread line Mallory's blood had drawn from his breastbone to the dirt. The town would remember the cheer. He would remember the line. He slipped the folded ribbon into his vest pocket and found his badge again with his thumb. The silver spun, once, twice. He could feel the town's eyes on him even now, though most had gone. Relief hung like laundry from every windowsill, but relief turned quick to judgment out here. Gratitude aged faster than milk under a desert sun. Bootsteps approached. Doc Halley, thin as wire, knelt at Mallory's side and pressed 2 fingers to the throat that no longer carried a pulse. "Clean shot," he murmured. "Quicken, He glanced up. "You meant it that way?" "I did," Kane said. Doc nodded once as though they'd settled something polite and ordinary. "Then you got it." He lowered his voice. "But you didn't get quiet. Telegraph operator brought this." Doc offered a narrow strip of paper. The ink bled in places where the man's hands had sweated. Kane read, "Mallory killed. Stop contractor. Affiliated Marshal Service. Stop hold shooter for questioning. Stop Hardin. Territorial Marshal." The square felt smaller. The sky lower. Kane folded the strip and tucked it behind the ribbon. He felt both pieces against his heart, like two opposing witnesses. "Hardin," Doc said softly. "That ring any bells?" Kane looked past the dock to the road that ran east, a tan ribbon disappearing into mirage. There at the far edge of town, a dust bloom had begun, a low smudge moving quick, steady, organized. He could hear it if he let his breath go quiet. The deep drum of multiple horses riding in cadence, the hush of leather, the steely clink of tack. He said nothing for a long heartbeat. In the hotel balcony's shade, one of the women fanned herself faster. Down the street, the jailhouse key winked where it hung, bright and civil as a Sunday spoon. The gallows rope ticked against the beam. Tick, tick, like a pocket watch without an owner. Elias followed Kane's gaze and went pale under his mustache. "Sheriff?" Kane eased his duster back just enough that the Colt's pearl grip saw daylight. He kept his voice low, even, so it wouldn't spook the remaining bones of the crowd. "Get the boy to the doctor. Close the jailhouse. Put the key in your pocket and don't take it out for anyone who didn't earn it." "Yes, sir. And you?" Kane's gaze tracked the riders as they resolved into men, hats low, coats long, light catching on stars that were not county issue. He felt that old split open up inside him, the one between the letter he'd sworn to and the faces it was supposed to protect. He lifted the badge one last time and pressed it flat against his chest until the cool bright bit his skin. "Me?" He set his hat brim to shadow his eyes. "I'll stand where I've always stood." The first rider's tin star flashed like lightning. A trumpet of iron-shod hooves rolled into town. The telegraph ticked a final nervous sentence and went still. "Sheriff Kane," a voice called from the dust, official and cold as a ledger. "By order of the Territorial Marshal, you'll come with us now." Kane's fingers found the ribbon in his vest. The gallows rope creaked once. The town held its breath again. High noon did a cruel thing. It drew a knife edge of shade from the gallows that fell across Rafe Mallory's body. The shadow reached his boots, then his belt, then the tin star stamped private contractor that still pinned his coat. Sheriff Kane stood in the square with dust biting his teeth, and the cheers' echo sinking into a silence that tasted like guilt. The crowd had started to drift. Relief traveled fast. Courage wandered home slower. Elias Boone hovered near the red-headed boy, working the irons with nervous fingers. "Easy," the deputy murmured. "Hold still now." Metal gave a tired click, one cuff, then the next. The boy cradled his wrists, skin ringed raw and blue. Kane knelt by the body. He did not close Mallory's eyes. He looked at the man's hands instead, calloused, steady even in death, trigger finger burnished smooth by use. The right palm bore a crescent of old scar where a knife had once slipped. The left knuckle was tattooed with a tiny white cross, a gambler's superstition or a soldier's memory. Kane slid 2 fingers beneath the lapel and found what he'd hoped for and feared. A little black book tied shut with waxed thread, the leather oily from sweat. He felt the weight of it, the way a man feels weather in a broken bone. "Sheriff?" Doc Halley's voice, thin as fence wire. "You aiming to start an autopsy in the street?" "Just wanting to see what kind of shadow he casts," Kane said. The book went into his duster alongside the pink ribbon, a ghost-soft thing that warmed with his body heat and made his heart colder. The boy glanced up, freckles standing out like embers in a white face. "He said I'd fetch coin," the boy whispered. Not quite to Kane, not quite to himself. Said somebody'd pay good for a talkative Harlan. "What's your given name?" Kane asked, keeping his tone gentle as a whetstone. "Micah. You with me now, Micah?" Kane stood, feeling the townsfolk's eyes tacked to him like burrs. "Elias, get him water, bread, then put him in the jail. Not as a prisoner, as a witness." The deputy blinked. "In the cells. The bars keep wolves out too." A woman near the mercantile scoffed. "Witness to what? Devil's dead." Kane looked down at Mallory and remembered a different square, a colder dawn, a rope burning an innocent neck. Rafe had ridden in smiling then, too. Brought a drifter named Joel Harmon with a paper that smelled like new ink and old lies. Kane had eyeballed the signature, Judge Avery, a man already under 6 feet of red clay. He'd argued, demanded time, demanded the letter of the law answer to its spirit. Rafe had only tipped his hat and said, "Ain't no judge in 100 miles gonna save him, Sheriff. Dead or alive, pays the same." By sunup, the town had a corpse and a lesson. When the law winked, men like Mallory didn't blink. That morning had lived beneath Kane's ribs ever since. It had ridden with him, sat at the foot of his bed, and watched his hand hover over his Colt on nights the wind scuffed the jailhouse door. It was the weight behind his shot today. He lifted the black book like a preacher lifts a Bible and eased the thread loose. The first page carried a neat hand that did not belong to Rafe. Columns, contracts, dates, amounts. The names blurred a moment as his eyes remembered what tears had felt like. Then the words steadied. Numborm, 34. Widow M. Haney. Trespass, collect, $20. Settled. No 35, Joel Harmon. Stock theft, Gallows recommended. Settled. No 36, Harlan Boy, Micah. Suspected courier, deliver to Hardin's men, pending. No 37, A. Ribbon. Lost goods, discipline, settled. Kane's thumb paused on the inked H. Hardin, the same name that bled across the telegraph strip in his vest, the same name whose dust cloud now boiled at the town's edge. The shadow lengthened. He flipped forward, pages whispering like dry grass. Another hand had signed certain disbursements, sharp, impatient pen slashes. K. Sparrow. He knew no man by that name, but he recognized what a sparrow really was. A small bird that survived by feeding from bigger beaks. An informant, maybe from this very street. Boot heels scuffed behind him. "Sheriff," Elias said, voice tight. "Folks are, well, they want words." He meant the crowd that had cheered a killing wanted to be cleaned of it. Kane closed the book and stood where everyone could see him, badge catching the sun, face shadowed by the brim of the black hat that had watched him grow harder than stone. He let the silence bite for a heartbeat. 2. "Rafe Mallory is dead," he said. "I pulled the trigger. The Territory will come to judge me for that. So be it." Murmurs, 1 or 2 amens, a hiss like steam. But hear me clean. Law ain't a paper you can forge, a rope you can buy, or a gun you rent by the hour. Some of you paid this man to do your hating for you. He let his gaze rake the porches, the windows, the faces that flinched. I've got names. I'll take them to a court that ain't nailed to a man's pocket. A rancher blushed, then reddened into anger. You accusing me? I'm reminding you. Kane's voice went low enough to cut. Justice doesn't hire out. A wind pushed across the square, hot and mean, lifting grit and the gallows rope together. The creak sounded like a laugh. Kane felt it in his spine. He remembered the boy's wrists, the ribbon in his pocket, the ledger in his coat, the quiet arithmetic of power done in back rooms while decent folk pretended sums couldn't be counted in daylight. Sheriff. The telegraph man, hat in hand, face gray as dishwater. More wire from Fort Dyer. Marshal Hardin's already in the saddle. I can hear him, Kane said. The thunder of hooves was close now, a steady iron heartbeat. He turned to Elias. Jailhouse, locked doors. Micah gets the corner cell with the cot and the blanket. You don't open that door for any star that ain't mine. You understand me? Elias's Adam's apple bobbed. Yes, sir. Kane looked at the townsfolk a last time. Take your children home. Close your shutters. And if any of you are thinking to cut a souvenir from that body, don't. Not while I'm breathing. He walked the ledger to the courthouse steps. The building had a brass scale nailed above the lintel, tarnished to the color of old molars. He dropped to a knee on the second stair and opened to the back pages, where men hid what they didn't want seen. A single line crawled along the bottom in tiny, fussy script. No 41. Sheriff Jeremiah Kane. Defiance. Provoke and hang by lawful order. Sponsor, H. Amount, 500. The ink didn't say Hardin outright. It didn't have to. The H was a serpent's curve he'd already seen twice today. Provoke and hang by lawful order. The words slid under his skin like cold water. A memory rose. Hardin on a parade ground years back. Polished boots. Sermon about order in a time of savagery. Kane had watched from the edge, just another gray coat with dust in his throat, thinking the man's eyes were the color of a blade held to the light. Now those eyes were riding toward him, backed by law, paper, steel, and applause, waiting to be flipped like a coin. Period true words fell out of him without thinking. By God's law and man's, you don't hire a neck and call it justice. Sheriff? Doc Halley had followed him to the steps, hat squashed in his hands. This is going to cut both ways. It always does. Kane tucked the ledger deep, where a bullet couldn't find it easy. He palmed his badge and felt the nick near the A. He thought of his wife's laugh, his boy's dirty hands. He thought of Joel Harmon and the wind that had made an orphan of a little girl tied to a ribbon. He thought of the crowd that had cheered because fear had finally moved off their porch and onto a man's chest in the dust. The riders came in 3 columns, sun flashing on tin and brass. Their leader wore a long gray duster and a stamp of righteousness across his face that would have fit fine on a preacher if the eyes hadn't been wrong. He pulled up 10 paces off the gallows and raised a gloved hand. Behind him, men fanned into a crescent that put the jailhouse and the courthouse both in their mouth. Sheriff Kane, he called, voice clipped, Eastern-schooled, hard enough to crack China. Marshal Hardin, Territorial. By lawful authority, you are hereby ordered to lay down your arms and submit to questioning for the killing of a federal contractor. Kane's Colt sat quiet and heavy on his hip. He didn't touch it. He touched his hat brim instead. Marshal, he said, polite as Sunday, your contractor was a murderer trailing a ledger fat with names, some of them yours. Ripples moved through the mounted line. Horses sidestepped. Tack jingled. Hardin didn't blink. You will hand over any and all documents recovered from the deceased. His gaze skimmed the crowd. And any witnesses, including the boy. In this town, Kane said, witnesses don't get traded like mules. You misunderstand your station. Hardin eased his mount forward until his horse's breath washed Kane's boots. The marshal's badge glinted like frost. The law rides with me. Kane's silver star lay in his palm, its edges cool, the center warm where his thumb had worried it smooth. He closed his fist until the points bit enough to bleed. The badge had weight. So did what he knew. From the jail came the soft slam of iron, as Elias did as he'd been told. From the hotel balcony, a fan stilled. From the gallows, the rope ticked the beam like a metronome, counting down a hymn. Kane smiled, without showing teeth. Law ain't always justice, he said, voice dropping until men leaned toward it. But justice rides with me. He took a step down from the courthouse, closing the distance, ledger heavy against his ribs like a second heart. Hardin's hand shifted toward the warrant packet at his saddle, fingers ready to pluck printed power into the air. Last chance, he said. The crowd inhaled as one. The wind flipped a page of the black book inside Kane's coat, and for a breath, he felt it flutter against his skin like a live thing, secrets restless to be spoken, names itching to be said. Somewhere behind Hardin's line, a single rifle hammer clicked back. Kane's eyes cut to the sound, and a bead of red light crawled up his duster like the eye of a snake, settling over his heart. The cheering died faster than gun smoke in a crosswind. By dusk, the square lay emptied of laughter. Doors latched and lamplight dimmed behind curtains like eyes pretending sleep. Sheriff Kane walked the center of Main Street with the slow, deliberate gait of a man listening for what the town would not say. Dust hissed along the boardwalks. Above the jail, a weather-bleached rope on the public gallows stirred once, though the air was still. He paused at the gallows and put 2 fingers to the hemp. Cold, cleanly tarred. Someone had tended it while folks were holed up in their houses. His silver badge picked up the last smear of sun and flashed an accusation back at him. He spun it once on his fingertips, old habit, old prayer, and went inside. The jail smelled of iron and lie. His boots clicked across plank floor, the sound too loud in a room that, on ordinary nights, held snoring drunks and a mule thief or 2. Now the cells were empty and scrubbed, every cot tight as a drum. On his desk, beneath the blotter, lay a matchbox. He opened it. Inside, a scrap of black ribbon and a chalk line drawn across it, neat as a ledger stroke. No law after sundown. Someone had carved into the desk leg with a penknife, fresh curls of wood still clinging to the cut. He let his breath out, slow. Plenty of law after sundown, he said to no one, voice low and flint-tired. Questions what price it charges. Bootsteps scuffed outside. The door swung in and Lydia Vaughn, owner of the Red Canary, slid in like a shadow smelling of tobacco and spilled whiskey. "Crowd's gone quiet, Sheriff," she murmured. "Too quiet. Men with scarves over their faces been moving up Telegraph Road. No whoops, no talk, just moving." Her fingers worried the locket at her throat. "They nailed a paper to my saloon door, a circle of 12 chalk marks." "Jury," Kane said. His steel-gray eyes cut to the window. The street gave him back his own reflection in glass. Hat brim, scar, the look that made liars swallow their stories. "Who leads 'em?" "Folks say committee. Folks never seen by daylight. But I did." She swallowed. Greeley. Deputy Lyle Greeley wore his badge straight and his hair oiled flatter than a snake trail. Kane's jaw flexed once. Go home through back lots, Lydia. Bolt your upstairs window. Keep the piano playing. Noise makes men uncertain. She hesitated. You killed that bounty hunter clean, Sheriff. Everyone saw he drew, but they ain't cheering now. Somebody's making them pick a side. Kane tipped his hat. That somebody just put himself on mine. The storm broke without thunder. 30 minutes later, a stage rattled into the square one wheel. Short, the driver slumped over like wet laundry. The coach horses were white with lather, eyes rolling, and the coach door was splintered. Kane threw it wide. A girl no older than 16 unfolded from the dark, bristling like a trapped lynx. Her cheek wore a smear of blood and clay, and she clutched a strip of paper to her chest. A patchy, proud chin, terrified eyes. Name, Kane said, gentle as he could make it. Nita, she whispered, breath fogging in the lantern glow. Nita Ashenay. What happened to the driver, Nita Ashenay? Masked men at Broken Spur Wash. 6. No words. Only this. She handed him the torn paper. On it, in tidy clerk's hand, were names and amounts, beside the word premium. At the bottom, a half-signature remained where the tear cut through. Judge L. And then white emptiness. In the margin, a second scrawl in a rougher hand. Deliver girl to the square before sundown. Payment posted. Kane felt the paper like a hot coal. The bounty hunter he'd put down had carried a black ledger. Part 2 of this mess had told him that much. Names, purchase orders, trails of blood written in ink. This scrap was its ghost. Who saw you? He asked. Everyone. Nita's voice cracked. They took a woman for talking, the schoolteacher from Hecate Flat. I ran when the coach tipped, hid under the axle. I don't know why I lived. Kane weighed choices fast. The badge, law, said bring her into custody and send to the judge at dawn. Justice said there would be no dawn if he left her in the open. He led her into the far cell and turned the key with a soft click. Protective custody, he said. Steel bars and clean water, beat a pine box and a fast horse. Her fingers curled around the bars. They will come. They will. He dropped his voice till it was all gravel. And they'll find me. A bell tolled once from the church. Just the one strike. A hollow sound dropping like a stone into a well. Windows opened an inch and shut again. The square breathed. They arrived out of the alleys, faces black-scarfed, hats pulled low. 15, then 20, then more, moving with the eerie hush of men who had rehearsed their courage in other rooms. At their point strode Deputy Greeley in a Sunday coat, badge plain on his chest, mouth neat, eyes dead. He stopped at the foot of the gallows and lifted his hands for silence he already possessed. Evening, Sheriff. His voice carried soft as the dust. We come for the girl. There's grievances needing balance. Best you step aside. Kane walked down from the porch and stood on the courthouse steps, lantern in one hand, Colt on his hip, the gallows behind like a dark cross. He planted his boots where men would have to shoot through him to reach the door. Moths battered themselves to death against the lantern chimney. Committee business don't outrank the law, he said, and the law says no citizen leaves my custody by night or rope. Greeley's smile didn't travel as far as his eyes. Law's what we say it is after sundown. You want to test that? Kane asked. I'll write the verdict in lead. A murmur ran the length of the line like wind across wheat. One of the masked men shifted his carbine. Kane raised the lantern until its light painted his face. He wanted them to see his eyes, the scar, the choice. "Law ain't always justice," he said, every syllable landing like boot heels. He let the badge fall into his palm, spinning once. "But justice rides with me." The first shot came from the far left, wild, more warning than war, glass shattered somewhere high. In the ringing silence that followed, Kane's Colt cleared leather with a sound like a door latch. He shot the rope above the gallows beam, hemp shredded in a shower of fibers. The noose dropped like a dead snake at Greeley's boots. The men flinched. It takes nerve to stand still when angles change. Kane used the breath he'd bought. "Take another step and the next rope I cut is around the neck of the man who throws it." The Colt's muzzle never left Greeley's chest. "You wearing that star tonight as decoration or responsibility?" Greeley tipped his head. "Responsibility," he said. Then he lifted one finger and the masked men stepped back as one, the square emptying the way a mule yard clears before lightning. Their retreat raised no dust. In 2 minutes the street looked exactly as it had. Lamps shuttered, boards still, rope puddled like shed skin. Only the gallows had changed, and the paper on its post. Kane stepped up and took it loose. The nail sang as it came free. A fresh bounty notice, printed fine as a banknote, offered $5,000 for the delivery of Sheriff Ezekiel Kane, dead or alive. At the bottom, the signature was not half torn this time. Judge Elias Tolliver. Above the name, a wax seal pressed with the territorial crest. His jaw worked once. Tolliver had baptized prospectors in law and hanged rustlers without blinking for 6 years. Tolliver had also sent whiskey to Kane's door when his wife and son died and stood silent at the funeral. A judge cut both ways. Back inside, the jail breathed its scrubbed, hopeful breath. He swung the cell door wide. Empty. On the cot lay a folded writ stamped with the same seal as the bounty. Protective transfer, it read, in a clerk's hand that matched the ledger scrap, commending Nita Ashenay to the custody of Deputy L. Greeley for conveyance to the court. Below, Sheriff Kane's name appeared in ink. His name, his signature, perfect. Kane stared at the flourish he'd made his whole life. The loop, the slash, forged as neat as a prayer. On the far bars, a black ribbon had been tied in a prim little bow. The knot sat precisely at eye level, the kind of cruelty that knew how to arrange itself. He crossed the cell in 3 strides and touched the window. The iron bar nearest the corner moved under his thumb. A saw mark glimmered pale where oil still dampened the cut. Not from outside, from in here. Someone had stood in this cell with a little file and all the time he needed. He turned. On the desk, the matchbox lay open, empty now. The chalk line in it had dusted the wood like midnight frost. He took his hat, the lantern, the Colt kept close as breath, and stepped back onto the porch. Main Street held its breath again. The gallows rope lay where it had fallen. The bell did not ring. Far up Telegraph Road, a single lantern bobbed like a will-o'-the-wisp, small, moving quick, keeping to fence shadows. Then another light slipped to join it, a pair running together. Lydia's silhouette filled the doorway across the street. "Sheriff," she called, soft as guilt. "Your deputy just rode out with the judge's clerk." They had a girl between them, wrapped in a blanket. Didn't look like she was breathing. Kane's thumb rested on the hammer. All the night's choices and all the years behind them lined up in the space between heartbeats. Badge, justice, rope, dawn. He stepped off the porch and into the street. Somewhere beyond the last house, a horse screamed, the sound knifing the quiet. The bobbing lanterns vanished at once as if a hand had snuffed them. Then the church bell tolled one time, just once, and the gallows rope, cut clean and coiled on the ground minutes before, swung on the beam as though an invisible neck had filled it. The night after Rafe Mallory fell in the dust, Sheriff Kane sat alone in his office with nothing but the lamplight and the creak of the jailhouse walls for company. The silver badge lay on his desk, not pinned to his chest. He spun it slowly with one finger, watching it glint and turn, as if it might give him the answer he could not find in himself. Outside, laughter and music spilled faint from the saloon. The town had slept easier, freer, as if a shadow had lifted, yet Kane's gut twisted, because he knew the law said something different than the people's cheers. The badge slowed, wobbling on the desk. He caught it and pressed it yet flat against the wood. That small disk of silver was heavier than iron shackles, heavier than the grave he'd put Mallory in. Earlier that day, old Mrs. Jessup had stopped him in the street, her hand trembling as she clutched his arm. "You done right, Sheriff," she whispered, her eyes glistening. "That devil had it comin'." But right wasn't written in law books, Kane thought. Law demanded a trial, a jury, a hanging done proper. What he'd done was justice, or murder, depending on who rode into town asking the questions. The door creaked open, and Deputy Cole stepped in, dust on his boots. "Kane," he said quietly, "you ought to sleep." "I don't sleep much." Kane's voice was flat. He didn't look up. Cole hesitated, then nodded toward the badge. "You worryin' the shine off it." Kane finally raised his eyes. "Tell me straight, Cole. Did I kill him as sheriff, or as a man with a gun?" Cole shifted his weight. "Both, maybe, but folks ain't afraid tonight. That's something." The words didn't settle. They only deepened the ache. Kane waved the deputy out, needing the silence again. By dawn, Kane saddled his horse and rode to the edge of town where the gallows stood like a black skeleton against the pale sky. The wood was dry, rope swaying gently in the morning breeze. He dismounted, boots crunching on gravel, and stared at the structure that had claimed many men by his order. Rafe Mallory had been spared this noose, spared the formality of justice. Kane's Colt .45 had written the verdict before any rope could. His fingers brushed the coarse hemp, and for a fleeting instant he imagined his own weight at the end of it. He pulled back sharply, breath clouding in the chill. "Law ain't always justice," he muttered under his breath, the words tasting of ash. "But justice rides with me." The phrase echoed in his mind. Every time he spoke it, something irreversible followed. The town bustled more freely that day, like shutters thrown open after a storm. Farmers carted goods, children skipped down the street, saloon girls laughed without glancing at the door in fear. Mallory's shadow no longer fell over them. Kane watched all of it, standing near the water well, and he felt the eyes of the people on him. Not wary, not suspicious, grateful. A rancher approached, hat clutched in calloused hands. "Sheriff," he said, voice rough with emotion, "I lost 2 calves last month. Mallory took 'em, said I owed him tax for grazing. Couldn't do a damn thing." His jaw trembled. "Thank you." Kane gave a stiff nod. Gratitude felt like a shackle, not a bomb. He had given them freedom, but at a cost that might yet be demanded from him. Late afternoon, a dust storm rolled across the plains, turning the sky the color of brass. Kane sat at his desk again, but this time Marshal Briggs from the Territory rode in, coat flapping like a crow's wings. He entered the jailhouse without asking, boots heavy on the floor. Kane. His tone was iron. Word reached us. You shot Rough Mallory. Kane's hand hovered near the badge. He didn't pin it, only looked at it. I did. Briggs's mustache twitched, eyes hard as stone. That was a mistake. Mallory carried federal warrants. He was an officer of the law, same as you. Killing him is murder. He was a butcher wearing a badge. Kane replied, voice low but steady. Briggs slammed a fist on the desk. Doesn't matter what you think. Law don't bend for your conscience. You should have arrested him, brought him before the bench. The people cheered, Kane said, finally pinning the badge back to his chest, the silver catching lamplight, because they were living under his terror. You call that law. I call that rot. Briggs leaned close, his breath heavy with whiskey. Be careful, Sheriff. The same rope you denied Mallory may yet be measured for you. When the marshal left, the door banged hard enough to rattle the window panes. Kane sat frozen, badge burning hot against his coat. That night, the townsfolk gathered in the saloon, voices rising in debate. Some praised Kane. Others whispered fear of what the territory marshals might do. A schoolteacher stood on a chair, saying, Sheriff Kane did what none of us dared. He gave us back our lives. Across the room a merchant countered, and now the law will come for him. What good's freedom if they hang our sheriff? The room fractured with tension. Kane pushed through the bat wings, dusting rain from his duster. The crowd fell silent. All eyes turned. He stepped into the center, eyes cold steel under the brim of his black hat. I didn't come for praise, he said, voice carrying like a bell. I came to remind you, justice costs. You cheered when Mallory fell. If the marshals come for me, will you still cheer? Murmurs spread, unease rippling. The question hung heavy. Kane left them in silence and returned to the jailhouse, where the empty cells yawned like waiting mouths. He lit a lantern, the flame throwing shadows long against the walls. He stood in the middle, badge glinting, Colt heavy at his side. The choice gnawed at him. If he stood by the badge, the law would claim him for murder. If he stood with the people, he became more than a sheriff. Something outside the law entirely, a savior or an outlaw cloaked in silver. He whispered into the empty room, which side of the rope am I on? The lantern flickered, smoke curling upward, and in that wavering light the badge gleamed like a noose knot waiting for his neck. The storm arrived not with lightning, but with the iron cadence of hooves. Sheriff Kane sat in the jailhouse with his lamp guttering low when the thunder of riders poured into town, steady as war drums. He stood, Colt on his hip, badge heavy on his chest. The glass rattled in the window frames. Dust boiled through the street like smoke from a fire. The townsfolk peered from behind curtains, their faces pale in the lamplight. They had cheered when Rafe Mallory fell, but this was different. This was the law itself returning to ask why. The first rider to break the square was Marshal Hardin. He dismounted in one practiced swing, boots polished like black stones. Behind him, a dozen deputies fanned into a crescent, rifles angled but not yet raised. Each wore a tin star gleaming cold in the stormlight. Hardin's voice was iron dipped in frost. Sheriff Kane, by order of the Territorial Authority, you are hereby suspended of duty and bound for questioning in Fort Dyer. Kane stepped out from the porch, duster flapping. He did not flinch. You mean to haul me in chains for killing a murderer, The whole town knows deserved it? Hardin's jaw flexed. The man you gunned down was a federal contractor. He carried warrants. He represented the law. You had no right to act as judge and executioner. Kane touched the edge of his badge with 2 fingers. I had the right to snot a man spillin' innocent blood. Paper don't make justice. A hush rippled across the square. Townsfolk had gathered now in doorways and porches, their eyes darting between Kane and the marshal. Hardin's deputies advanced a pace. "Sheriff," Hardin said, voice low, "lay down your weapon. Don't make your people pay for your pride." Kane's steel-gray eyes swept the crowd, faces that had known terror under Mallory, faces that had cheered when the blood dried in the dust. The people shuffled, whispers threading the air. He saw fear and hope warring in them. He saw betrayal waiting. From the hotel balcony, Lydia Vaughn called down, her voice sharp as a whip. "Mallory bled this town dry. Sheriff Kane saved us, and you know it." A cheer broke from one corner, then another. Men and women stepped into the square, small knots gathering, fists clenched. A rancher shouted, "You hang Kane, you hang us all." Hardin's face darkened. "Stand down," he barked. "This is federal business." Kane lifted his chin. "Federal business don't outrank the truth. Ask them." He gestured at the crowd, at the people pressing closer. The deputies shifted uneasily. Rifles gleamed. The townsfolk swelled with courage borrowed from Kane's stance. A boy threw a rock that clattered at a marshal's boot. Tension tightened like a drawn bowstring. Hardin raised his hand, ready to signal. "Last warning, Kane." Kane's voice carried, low but hard. "Law ain't always justice, but justice rides with me." The crowd roared in answer. Some raised pitchforks, others brandished old rifles pulled from behind doors. The square seethed. Hardin's deputies lifted their weapons, barrels glinting. For a heartbeat, the world balanced on a knife edge, law on one side, people on the other. Kane stood at the fulcrum. "Hold!" Kane barked, raising a hand. The townsfolk froze, breaths ragged. He turned back to Hardin. "If you want me, Marshal, you'll walk through every man, woman, and child here. You ready for that blood?" Hardin's mouth tightened. He studied the crowd, farmers with lined faces, children clinging to their mothers, Lydia Vaughn standing proud in her saloon dress, ranchers with dust in their beards and defiance in their eyes. These were not outlaws. These were citizens, his citizens. For a moment, the marshal hesitated. He had the law on paper, but Kane had the living law of the people. "Don't think you've won," Hardin said finally, voice taut. He signaled his men to lower rifles. "The territory will not forget this. There's a gallows waiting for you, Sheriff. Whether you walk to it or hang from it by force, that's only a matter of time." He mounted his horse, coat snapping in the wind, and wheeled his men back. The riders clattered out of the square, leaving churned dust and silence behind. The townsfolk erupted. Cheers, shouts, hats thrown high. They surged toward Kane, clapping him on the back, calling his name, but Kane felt no triumph. He touched the badge pinned to his chest. It felt heavier than before, hotter, as though it branded him rather than honored him. He looked at the faces shining with gratitude, and he knew what they did not. Hardin would be back, and next time he would not ride with only 12 deputies. Lydia stepped close, her voice fierce. "You stood for us, Kane. Don't you doubt it." Kane's eyes stayed on the gallows at the edge of town, its rope swaying in the wind like a finger pointing at him. "I don't doubt it," he said, voice low. "I just wonder how much longer I can stand." The crowd's cheers rolled like thunder, but Kane felt the storm had only begun. The gallows rope groaned in the wind like a hungry throat. Sheriff Kane sat in his office, black ledger open before him, lamplight staining the pages the color of dried blood. His name stared back at him from the neat, clerkly script. Sheriff Jeremiah Kane. Defiance. Provoke and hang by lawful order. The words might as well have been carved into the wood of the desk. The ledger trembled faintly in his hand, though his fingers were steady. Outside, the town slept under a fragile silence, broken only by the squeal of a swinging sign and the bark of a lonely dog. Kane reached for his badge. The silver star turned between his fingers, the nick in the metal catching the light like an old scar. He pressed it flat against his palm until the edges cut crescents into his skin. A sheriff's badge was meant to be a shield, not a death warrant. Yet here it was, his life reduced to a contract line in a bounty ledger, his execution already purchased. The door creaked open, and Deputy Elias Boone slipped in, hair mussed, hat clutched to his chest. His eyes went to the ledger, then back to Kane. "I heard," he whispered. "Somebody's been passing that book around town. Folks seen your name in it." Kane didn't look up. "What do they make of it?" "Some say it's forgery. Others—" Elias's voice faltered. "Others reckon the Territory already set their sights on you, and this book just tells how it'll end." Kane closed the ledger with a snap that made the lamp gutter. "Doesn't matter what they reckon. What matters is the choice I make when Hardin comes back." Elias wet his lips. "And what choice is that?" Kane leaned back, the chair groaning beneath him. "Badge or the people? If I bow to the law, I ride to Fort Dyer in chains. If I stand with the people, I turn my back on the oath I swore." Elias's young face twisted. "You ain't never turned your back on this town. You saved us." Kane's voice dropped, iron and sorrow mixed. "A man can save a town and damn himself in the same breath. Don't forget that." The following morning, the church bell tolled before sunup. Folks gathered in the square, whispering like wind through dead grass. Word had spread. The marshals were riding back with warrants in hand. Some brought rifles, others torches, as though preparing for siege. Mothers clutched children close. Ranchers stood with jaws set hard. Kane walked among them, duster trailing dust, hat brim low. Murmurs followed him, half reverent, half fearful. Lydia Vaughn pushed through the crowd and caught his arm. "You can't give yourself up," she hissed. "You saw what Mallory was. You know what Hardin is. You walk away with them. You're dead before you see a judge." Kane's steel-gray eyes studied hers. "And if I fight them here, how many graves will this town dig before nightfall?" Her grip tightened. "Sometimes graves are the price of freedom. Don't you dare forget what he did to us." Her voice cracked. "Don't you dare." Behind them, the gallows rope swayed, its creak loud in the morning hush. By noon, Marshal Hardin returned with twice the riders. Tin stars glinted on every chest. They lined the street like a wall of iron and dust. Hardin dismounted, boots striking the ground with the authority of a gavel. "Sheriff Kane," he called, voice carrying. "You will submit to custody, now." The townsfolk surged forward, shouting protests. "He's our sheriff. He saved us. Mallory was a devil. The square boiled with voices. Hardin raised a hand, and his deputies leveled rifles at the crowd. Silence fell, taut and trembling. Kane stepped out from among his people. He held his badge in one hand, the ledger in the other. The silver glinted. The black leather absorbed the light. Two symbols, one of law, one of corruption. Marshal, Kane said, voice steady as steel drawn slow from a sheath. I have in my hand proof that Mallory's badge was bought and his warrants forged. This ledger holds contracts signed by your own men. My name's written in here, too. Payment promised for my neck. You still want to call that justice? Hardin's gaze flickered, only for a heartbeat, but Kane saw it. The marshal's deputies shifted uneasily, eyes darting. You expect these people to believe a book pulled off a corpse? Hardin sneered. You're reaching, Sheriff. You killed a federal man, and now you're scrambling to save your hide. Kane turned to the crowd, lifting the ledger high. You know what Mallory did. You lived under his shadow. He was no man of law. He was a hangman for hire. His voice deepened, resonant with anger and grief. Law ain't always justice, but justice rides with me. The people roared, the sound rolling like thunder through the square. Hardin's face hardened to granite. He snapped his fingers, and two deputies advanced with chains. Take him. The crowd surged, blocking their path. Farmers raised pitchforks, ranchers lifted rifles, saloon girls brandished broken bottles. The deputies faltered, caught between orders and the fury of a town refusing to yield. Kane's hand brushed the pearl grip of his Colt. Every muscle screamed for him to draw, to end it, in fire and blood. But his gaze lifted to the gallows, rope swaying in the wind, and he felt the weight of every choice pressing down. If he fought, men and women would die here. If he surrendered, he would hang. He turned to the people, his people. Their faces pleaded, demanded, believed. In them he saw the wife and son he had lost, the graves that had carved his soul into stone. Kane raised his badge high, then let it fall into the dust at his feet. A gasp rippled through the crowd. He unbuckled his gun belt and dropped it beside the badge. I won't see this town torn apart over me, he said, voice raw but unshaken. You want me, Marshal? I'll walk with you. The people cried out, some in protest, some in grief. Lydia's voice cut through like a knife. Don't do this, Kane. They'll kill you. He met her eyes, and for once they softened. Better me than all of you. Hardin smiled thin as a razor. He stepped forward with the chains. Kane held out his hands. The cold iron bit his wrists. The marshal's deputies shoved him toward the gallows, the crowd screaming defiance. Elias tried to break through, but Kane shook his head once, firm. On the steps of the gallows, Kane paused. He looked back at his town, at the people who had cheered and wept, at the badge glinting in the dust. His voice carried one last time. Remember this day. Remember that justice is yours to hold, not theirs to sell. The marshal yanked the chain, dragging him upward. The rope swayed, waiting. Rain hammered the square, hard enough to turn dust into mud and thunder into a drumbeat for judgment. Sheriff Kane stood chained on the gallows, rope swaying like a serpent above his shoulder. Marshal Hardin barked orders at his deputies, their rifles glistening in the storm. The townsfolk pressed closer, faces lit with fury, torches guttering in the downpour, and then the fire bloomed. The marshal's wagon hissed as lantern oil caught, and roared into flame, black smoke boiling upward. Sparks spat into the night, leaping from wheel to wheel. Inside that wagon lay the ledger, the black book heavy with names, contracts, and the single damning line that condemned Kane. If the fire swallowed it, so too would vanish the only written proof of Mallory's corruption. Hardin spun, shouting, "Save the wagon!" 2 deputies bolted through the mud, but the blaze licked higher, a hungry beast gnawing wood and canvas. The crowd surged. A rancher swung his rifle butt at a deputy, knocking him down. A saloon girl smashed a bottle against another's shoulder. Cries and curses split the rain. On the gallows, Kane's steel-gray eyes burned brighter than the fire. He twisted his wrists, feeling the chains bite, skin splitting under iron. His voice cut across the chaos. "People of Garrison, you hold justice in your hands now. Don't let it be stolen." The mob roared back, their fury breaking into full revolt. They crashed against the deputies, pushing them back step by step. Rifles cracked, muzzle flashes strobing in the storm. A boy screamed. A man fell, clutching his chest. Kane wrenched his arms, every muscle burning. The chain gave a scream of metal on metal, a link snapping. His right hand came free. He ripped the noose aside just as Hardin leapt up onto the platform, pistol drawn. "You'll hang tonight, Sheriff," Hardin snarled, rain coursing down his face. Kane's fist shot out, iron cuff still clamped on his left wrist. The blow split Hardin's lip and sent the pistol spinning. They grappled in the storm, boots sliding on the slick boards. Below, the wagon collapsed in a roar of sparks. Flames devoured the ledger whole. The truth, the lies, the names, all curling into smoke. Hardin drove Kane back against the beam, reaching for his knife. Kane seized the marshal's wrist. The 2 locked like wolves in a pit. The rope swung between them, brushing Kane's cheek, whispering of endings. "You're finished," Hardin hissed. "Without that book, you're just a murderer in a badge." Kane's teeth bared in something between a snarl and a grim smile. Law ain't always justice. He slammed his forehead into Hardin's, bone cracking on bone. The marshal staggered, knife clattering to the boards. Kane snatched it up. For a breath, all he had to do was drive it home. But the blade trembled in his grip. His wife's face flickered in memory. His boy's laughter. If he struck, he would be no different than Mallory, an executioner cloaked in steel. He dropped the knife. Hardin lunged, but Kane spun, hooking the marshal in the chain that still bound his left wrist. He wrenched, the iron loop snapping tight around Hardin's throat. The marshal gagged, fought, clawed. Kane twisted once more and hurled him from the platform. Hardin crashed into the mud below, sprawling senseless among the wreckage. A cheer split the storm. The people surged forward, driving the last of the deputies back into the dark. Some fled. Others tossed down stars, unwilling to fight neighbors for a man already beaten. Kane stood on the gallows, rain washing blood from his face, chains dangling broken. The rope swayed behind him, still waiting. He looked down at the people. Faces wet, fierce, hopeful. Faces that had chosen him over the law. Lydia Vaughn stepped into the square, skirt soaked, hair plastered to her cheeks. She lifted her chin. "What now, Sheriff? Do we still bow to their law? Or do we make our own?" The question carved silence through the rain. Every eye turned to Kane. His badge lay in the mud where he had dropped it. The fire had consumed the ledger. No proof remained, only the people's memory and his word. Slowly, Kane climbed down from the gallows. He bent, picked up the badge, and turned it in his fingers. Its shine was dulled, edges nicked, a symbol of law, a law that had betrayed itself. He looked at the people, at Lydia, at Elias, standing pale but proud, rifle in hand. "I swore an oath," Kane said, voice raw, carrying across the storm, "to uphold the law, but tonight you saw what law has become. Ink bought and sold, chains around the innocent, gallows built for truth-tellers." He closed his fist around the star. If law don't walk with justice, then it's just another gang with prettier clothes. A murmur rolled through the crowd. Agreement, fear, awe. "I'll wear this badge," Kane continued, pinning it once more to his chest. "But from this day on, I wear it for you, for justice, not for them." The people roared, their voices rising with the thunder. Some wept, some shouted, some simply stood stunned. Hardin stirred in the mud, groaning. Two ranchers moved to drag him forward, ready to string him up on the gallows. Kane raised a hand. "No." His voice cracked like a whip. The crowd froze. "We don't answer corruption with vengeance. Let him live to see what true justice looks like." Hardin spat blood, eyes burning hate, but Kane turned away. The decision was made. Closing scene by dawn, the storm had passed. The square stank of wet ash and gunpowder. The gallows loomed empty, rope frayed where the night's struggle had left its mark. Kane stood on the jailhouse porch, watching the sunrise bleed red over the horizon. His duster clung damp to his shoulders, but his spine was straight. He had chosen. The people moved about the square, clearing wreckage, speaking in hushed tones. Some looked at him with gratitude, others with unease. They knew he had stepped outside the law, yet they could not deny the freedom that came with it. Sheriff Kane touched his badge once more. It no longer felt like a shield or a chain. It felt like a burden and a promise.